Somewhere in Montana, 40 acres of land sit in silence. Nothing moves. Nothing grows. Nothing here would make you look twice. Just a tin shed on a rise. Sage running to the fence line. A padlock too heavy for the door it guards. But underneath is something else entirely. A room, lit, warm, running on systems no county inspector has ever seen, stocked with 11 years of evidence, enough to destroy a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, enough to explain why two people died, why a child was given away, why one man spent 13 years underground building something he could never use himself. The ground holds its secrets quietly until the right person comes to open the door. Not that the time mattered, not that Eli Harmon had anywhere to be afterward, but he noticed it. He noticed things like that. The exact moment a door opened, the exact weight of silence before someone said something that changed everything. You learn to notice small things when the big things keep slipping out from under you. The man behind the desk was named Dennis Greer. Middle-aged, wire-rimmed glasses. A coffee cup that said, "World's okayest dad" in fading blue letters. He wasn't cruel. Eli had met cruel. Dennis wasn't that. He was something harder to define and somehow harder to forgive. He was simply finished. Used up by years of watching boys walk into this room frightened and walk out of it hollow. Whatever grief he might have once carried for those boys had been compressed over time into something else. Something flat and functional and entirely spent. He slid the envelope across the laminate desk without looking up. Eli took it. Inside a birth certificate he'd seen before. A social security card in a cracked plastic sleeve. $200 in cash, the bill slightly soft from handling. And a bus ticket. One way. Harlow, Montana. He'd never heard of it. He set the papers on the desk and looked at them and didn't say anything. Because there was nothing to say. Because every word he'd ever tried to speak in rooms like this one had disappeared into the air like it was never there. So he'd stopped trying. Years ago. He'd learned to keep his words close and his face empty and his hands very, very still. "There's one more thing," Dennis said. He opened the top drawer, pulled out a second envelope. The kind of envelope that announced itself before you opened it. Thick, cream-colored. A law firm's name embossed in the corner in dark green ink. Callaway and Associates Attorneys at Law. Harlow, Montana. "This came 6 weeks ago," Dennis said. "We were holding it until today." Eli looked at the envelope. His name was on the front, written by hand. Small, precise letters that leaned slightly forward. Like whoever wrote them was used to economy, used to not wasting space. "Your grandfather passed," Dennis said. "Left you something in Montana. That's where the bus is going." Eli picked up the envelope, said nothing. "Good luck," Dennis said. And that was it. 18 years, 7 homes, 100 caseworkers whose names he'd stopped trying to remember after the third one. And on the other side of all of it, a bus ticket. A second envelope, and a grandfather he'd never actually known. Fletcher Dunn. He knew the name the way you know the name of a country you've never visited. It existed. It had geography. But it had no smell, no texture, no weight of lived experience attached to it. Fletcher Dunn was his mother's father, a man who had for 6 months when Eli was 5 years old taken him in, and then surrendered him to the state of Oregon. Surrendered. That was the word in the file. Like a flag going down. He walked to the bus station, 20 minutes on foot through streets that looked the same as every street he'd ever left behind. The sky was gray and indifferent. A dog barked once from behind a chain-link fence and then stopped like it couldn't be bothered to follow through. Eli walked with his duffel bag over one shoulder, the canvas worn soft at the handles. Same bag for 6 placements. Same bag he'd packed in the dark at 3 in the morning more than once when things went wrong, and the only available response was to put what mattered into the bag and move. He sat on a bench outside the bus station and opened the second envelope. The letterhead was clean, professional, a woman's name at the top, Petra Calloway Esquire. He read the letter twice, slow, then once more faster. Fletcher Dunn had died 3 weeks prior. He had left behind 40 acres of land in Fremont County, Montana. One structure described as a single outbuilding off-grid utilities. County records showed a lien for unpaid property taxes. Outstanding balance $7,200. There was also an offer. A company called Apex Land Group had extended a purchase offer of $12,000 for the parcel as is. They would cover the back taxes and all associated legal fees from the purchase price. Eli looked at that number for a long time. $12,000. He could pay off the county, pocket the rest, and never think about Harlow, Montana again. He could figure out Portland. He had exactly one contact in Portland, a guy named Marcus, who had once offered him a couch if things got bad. He didn't know Marcus's last name. He didn't actually know if the offer still stood. He didn't know much about Marcus at all, except that the offer had been made once in a parking lot outside a gas station by someone who had seemed to mean it. But he could try. He could also get on the bus and see what a dead man left him. A man who had 13 years ago handed a 5-year-old child to the state of Oregon for reasons that no one had ever fully explained. He got on the bus. Not because he had a plan, because the ticket was in his hand and it pointed in one direction, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the only navigational tool available to you is the direction you haven't yet gone. The phone call to Petra Calloway took 6 minutes. He made it from a pay phone near the ticket window, which surprised him. He didn't know pay phones still existed. He dialed the number from the letterhead, and it rang twice. Calloway and Associates. A woman's voice. Precise, efficient. The voice of someone who scheduled days in 15-minute increments and found deviation genuinely irritating. "This is Petra Calloway." He told her his name. A short pause. The sound of a chair adjusting. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "I've been expecting your call. I'm sorry for your loss." He didn't know how to respond to that. "You didn't mourn a ghost." "The offer," he said. "Apex Land Group is highly motivated," she said. "The deadline is the end of the month. If the county initiates seizure proceedings, what's on the land?" A pause, shorter this time. "One structure, a Quonset hut. County records listed as a single outbuilding. Off-grid water from a well generator power. No additional improvements on record." He looked out through the dirty glass of the payphone enclosure at the people moving through the station. Everyone going somewhere. Everyone with a direction already decided. Everyone carrying luggage that belonged to a life that had a shape to it. "I'm getting on the bus today," he said. "I'll call you when I get there." She exhaled, controlled, professional. "There's a key waiting at the bus depot in Harlow," she said. "Lockbox at the ticket counter. The combination is your date of birth." His date of birth. He stood with the receiver against his ear and turned that over in his mind. "He set it up before he died?" Eli asked. "Yes," she said. "Your grandfather arranged it." He hung up, stood still for a moment, thinking about a man setting a combination lock using the birthday of the child he gave away. Whether that was cruelty or something else entirely, he couldn't yet say. He didn't have enough information. What he had was $200, a bus ticket, and a question with no answer attached to it. He bought a granola bar from a vending machine and ate it on a bench and waited for his bus. The journey took 17 hours. Oregon came apart slowly outside the window. The suburbs, first identical roof-lined strip malls with signs promising things, gas stations with the same 4 logos repeating like a sentence said too many times. Then the trees, dense and green and serious about themselves in the way Pacific Northwest trees always are, as if they've been standing long enough to have opinions about it. Then the high desert, brown and mineral and enormous. The kind of landscape that has no interest in making you comfortable and makes no apology for that. Then Idaho, which looked like Oregon but flatter and more honest about it. Then Montana. Montana arrives the way certain truths arrive. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply becomes itself. The hills rolling out brown and sage-dusted under a sky the color of old pewter. The distances between things suddenly meaningful in a way city distances never are. The wind moving through the grass in long, slow pulses that look from the window like breathing. Eli slept with his forehead against the glass. Ate vending machine crackers at rest stops. Didn't talk to anyone. He had learned over years of moving between homes that conversations on buses led to questions he had no good answers to. Where are you from? Where are you going? What are you doing out here alone? He stared out the window instead. And in the hours between fitful sleep and not quite waking, he let himself think about the 6 months he'd spent with Fletcher Dunn when he was 5. The memories were fragmentary, more texture than narrative. Cold air, the smell of something resinous, pine maybe, or machine oil, a sound mechanical and rhythmic, a tool working against resistance with the patience of someone who understood that resistance was the nature of the material and not a personal affront. A wool blanket rough against his chin, a voice, low, infrequent. That didn't talk down to him the way adults talk to 5-year-olds, as if the small size of a person indicated a small interior. Fletcher had spoken to him like he was already someone, like his presence in the room was simply a fact. And facts were things Fletcher Dunn worked with rather than around. Then one morning, strangers at the door. Soft voices in another room. A bag being packed but not by him. A car ride with people who smelled like fabric softener and good intentions and called him buddy in the particular tone of people who have been coached to seem warm. He'd understood over the years what surrendered meant in the legal documents. It meant Fletcher had signed the papers, voluntarily. There had been no court order, no legal compulsion, just a grown man making a decision about a 5-year-old child who had no say in it. Eli had built himself around that. The way you build around a structural wall, incorporating it into everything else because everything else rests on it. He was the boy who had been let go on purpose, and that knowledge had given him a particular hardness, not aggressive, just dense, load-bearing, the kind of interior architecture that holds everything else up by refusing to flex. He would find out in 16 hours that the wall was wrong. He would find out that he'd been building on a story that someone else had written. On purpose, for reasons that would take the rest of the night to fully understand. But he didn't know that yet. He watched Montana through dirty glass and let the landscape do what landscapes do when you give them enough time, which has become real. Harlow was smaller than he'd expected, and more itself. A main street of 2-story brick buildings, most of them original and unrestored, their facades carrying the quiet dignity of things that had stood long enough to stop caring about appearances. A diner with a hand-lettered sign in the window. A hardware store with tools arranged in the display like someone had thought about it. A bar called the Rimrock with a neon sign that buzzed faintly in the afternoon light, not quite committing to its own glow. The bus depot was attached to a gas station at the south end of the street. One room, plastic chairs, a rack of tourist brochures for places 40 miles in every direction, and a woman behind the counter with reading glasses pushed up on her head who pointed him to the lock boxes on the wall before he could even ask. He must have had the look of someone who had come a long way to pick something up. He found the box, turned the dial. 220920006. September 22nd, 2006, his birthday, the day he was born, the day that apparently a man he barely remembered had decided to use as a code for something in Montana long before Eli was old enough to come find it, long before anyone could have known whether he'd ever come at all. Inside the box, a key. He picked it up and immediately understood it was not what he'd expected. He'd expected something ordinary, a padlock key. A house key? Something modern and forgettable. The kind of key you lose in a jacket pocket and find 3 months later and can't remember what it opened. This was iron. heavy for its size. The head worked into an intricate pattern almost decorative, like the key itself was meant to be considered. Like whoever made it understood that some things are worth making properly even when no one is watching, especially then. You wouldn't throw a key like this away. You'd keep it and wonder about it and feel its weight in your palm like a question that already knew its own answer. He closed his hand around it and went to find a ride. Olin Raleigh was at the rimrock at the far end of the bar. A broad man in a canvas jacket, hands that had done physical work for decades, blunt-fingered, scarred at the knuckles in the pattern that comes from working with metal and cold for long enough that the marks become permanent. He looked Eli over with the frank assessment of someone who read people the way he read weather quickly from surface signs without sentiment. "You're the done kid," Olin said. "Not a question." "I need a ride to the property," Eli said. Olin drank from his beer, set it down carefully. 20 miles of bad road, $50. Eli paid it. The truck was a heavy-duty Ford, 15 years old at least, maintained with the kind of attention that working men in remote places give to the tools they depend on, absolutely, because out here there's no backup and no one coming to help if it fails. The cab smelled of diesel and sawdust in the warmth of a machine that runs every day in all weather without complaint. Olin drove without conversation for the first 10 miles, which Eli appreciated more than he could have said. Then, "Strange one, your grandfather." Eli said nothing. "I used to drop supplies at his gate," Olin said. "Twice a year, sometimes 3 times. He'd leave a list on the post the night before. Money in an envelope clipped right underneath it." A pause. "Never came out while I was there. Never once. I'd drop the supplies, take the envelope, drive back." "How long?" Eli asked. 11, 12 years maybe." Eli looked out the window. Sage and sky and the last of the afternoon light going long and golden across everything. "You ever meet him?" Eli asked. "Before the gate thing." "Once," Olin said. "When he first moved out here. Came into the hardware store. Concrete mix, steel pipe fittings, ventilation equipment. Things you'd buy if you were doing serious construction." He paused again. "Not the kind of things you'd buy for a tin shed." Eli let that sit. The road had gone from asphalt to gravel to 2-track dirt. The truck's headlights cutting through the early dusk. Nothing on either side but sage and distance, and the first stars showing up above the eastern ridge. Then Olin slowed, pointed. There, on a slight rise caught in the headlights, the Quonset hut. A perfect half-cylinder of corrugated steel, maybe 40 feet long, sitting on a concrete pad. No windows on the visible face, no lights, no landscaping, no infrastructure visible from the road. It looked exactly like what the county records said it was. A single outbuilding, a structure of zero distinction. The kind of thing you drive past without registering and forget by the time you reach the next mile. Eli stared at it. "This is as far as I go," Olin said. Eli got out with his bag. The cold hit him immediately. Not just temperature, the cold of altitude and openness. The cold of a place where the wind has nothing to interrupt it for 50 miles in every direction. The air was so clear it felt sharp in the lungs, like breathing something that hadn't been breathed before. Above him, stars. More of them than he'd ever seen from any city or suburb or highway shoulder in 18 years of moving around. The Milky Way, not an abstraction, but a physical fact, stretched across the dark like something deliberately placed there by someone who understood scale. Olin rolled the window down. "Key fits the padlock on the door," he said. "There's wood inside for the stove. Fletcher always kept it stocked." He looked at Eli across the dark cab. "You get into trouble, you walk east. Hit the highway in about 4 miles. Eli nodded. Olin shifted into reverse, back down the track, his tail lights diminishing. 2 small red points. Then nothing at all. Eli stood in the absolute dark for a moment, listening. Wind, Grass, the vast tidal sound of a landscape that didn't need him, that had been here before him and would be here long after him. Not the silence of a room where no one was speaking, the silence of a place that had never needed speech to know what it was. He picked up his bag and walked up the rise. The padlock was heavy-duty, far more serious than the door it secured. The iron key slid in without resistance, turned with a precision that shouldn't have surprised him, but did. Clean, certain, as if it had been oiled and tested recently, as if someone had been maintaining it right up until they couldn't anymore. The door groaned on its hinges. Inside, cold air that smelled of dust and old wood smoke, and something underneath faint like machine oil and concrete. He found his flashlight and swept the beam around. One long space, curved walls forming ceiling and sides without distinction. To the left, a cast-iron wood stove with a neat stack of split firewood beside it. To the right, a cot with a folded wool blanket. In the center, a wooden table and a single straight-back chair. Along the far wall, metal shelving, loaded with military-style storage containers, each labeled in small, precise handwriting. Rice, beans, lamp oil, first aid, generator parts. A welding table against the back wall covered in tools. Metal scraps arranged with the appearance of abandonment, but distributed too evenly, he thought too arranged like set dressing rather than genuine accumulation. He stood in the middle of it. This was his inheritance, a metal shed in Montana, a cot, some canned goods, and a debt he couldn't pay. He looked at the shelving, and then he looked at the books. One shelf above the cot, a dozen volumes, technical manuals mostly, welding guides, a water treatment handbook, a manual on off-grid power systems, and one that was slightly different from the rest. A book on mechanical engineering, commercial systems, hydraulics, pressure tolerances. Older. The kind of textbook you find in used bookstores with someone else's underlining already in it. He pulled it from the shelf, not because he had a reason to, because he was looking at things rather than past them. He'd always done that in new places. You didn't understand a space by glancing at it. You looked at it in sections, methodically, until you knew where everything was. And this book was too clean. The spine barely cracked. Not the book of someone who actually used it for reference. The book of someone who wanted something to be on a shelf without being read. He opened it. Page after page of dense technical text. Diagrams of hydraulic systems. Pressure calculations. Until he reached page 112, where the text stopped mattering. Because tucked between pages 112 and 113 was a piece of paper, folded in quarters. He unfolded it. A hand-drawn blueprint, not architectural but mechanical, precise, done by someone who understood exactly what they were drawing. A layout of the Quonset hut from above. Every measurement notated, every structural element labeled. In the lower right quadrant, the cast iron stove. And behind it, marked in red ink, a small square. And beside it, two words written in the same economical script he'd seen on the storage labels. Access point. Eli set the book down. He looked at the stove. He crossed the room slowly, not rushing, his hands very still, his breathing even. The stove sat on a concrete pad, vented through the roof. Standard enough. He crouched down and looked at the floor behind it. The concrete pad extended about 8 inches behind the back of the stove, and at the rear edge, visible only from this angle and this light, a slight rectangular seam, almost imperceptible, but there if you were looking. And Eli was always looking. He looked at the blueprint again, looked at the diagram. Then he put his hand flat against the concrete directly behind the stove's left rear leg at the point marked in red, and pushed, not hard, not dramatically, just firmly, steadily, like you would if you knew what you were doing. There was a sound, low, mechanical, a soft internal click that traveled through the floor beneath his palm like a confirmation. And then the floor moved. Not violently, not suddenly. Slowly. With the measured pace of something engineered to be controlled and quiet. The concrete pad, the entire section behind the stove, began to descend. The stove going with it, a rectangular opening appearing in the floor. Clean edges. Machined. 6 feet long. 3 feet wide. A staircase going down. The air that rose from the opening was nothing like the air in the hut. Dry, temperature controlled, and something else, a faint electrical quality. The air of a place with systems. A place designed by someone who understood the difference between a space that keeps a person alive and a space actually built for a person to live in. Those are different things. Most people never notice they're different things. Eli stood at the edge of the opening. The staircase went down into the dark. He could take the $12,000. He could call Petra Calloway in the morning and say the decision was straightforward. He could be back in Oregon by the weekend with $12,000 and no particular plan, but at least some room to make one. He could not think about what was below him. He picked up his flashlight and went down. The stairs were steel, narrow, ringing faintly under his boots in a way that sounded purposeful, like something designed to remind you of its own existence. At the bottom, a short corridor. Smooth poured concrete, absolutely level. A single door at the far end. Heavy. A central wheel handle surrounded by locking lugs. Built like something designed to hold against pressure. To hold against whatever the outside world might one day decide to throw at it. He turned the wheel. The mechanism engaged. A series of deliberate clunks from inside the door, then released. The door swung inward, and Eli Harmon stopped, completely, in the doorway. Because what he walked into was not what the blueprint had prepared him for, and the blueprint had been very detailed. The space was the same footprint as the Quonset hut above, same curved wall profile, but it had been lined and finished into something that shared nothing else with the hut. Pale wood paneling on the curved walls, warm under indirect lighting that ran along the ceiling in a continuous strip. Gray carpet underfoot, dense and sound-absorbing. Air that was warm and dry and carried a faint living quality, as if the room itself had been breathing in here without him for years. On one side, a compact kitchen, electric range, refrigerator humming low, sink with a real faucet, cabinets built from the same pale wood as the walls, the doors fitting precisely with no gap. On the other side, a couch, a bookshelf running the full length of the space, loaded with paperbacks, technical manuals, binders in different colors. A desk with a lamp and a chair positioned just slightly toward the room, rather than toward the wall, the way you position a chair when you want to be in a place, rather than just occupying it. At the far end, a bed, properly made, thick comforter, 2 pillows, a wool blanket folded at the foot. It was a home, not an approximation of one, not a space adapted to serve as one out of necessity. A home designed and built from the beginning to be lived in by a person. Every dimension considered. Every material chosen for how it would feel to someone spending their days inside it. The shelving at a height that required no reaching. The lighting angled to avoid glare. The carpet dense enough to feel like ground rather than floor. Eli walked through it slowly. He ran his hand along the kitchen counter. Smooth. No chips. He opened the refrigerator. Empty. Cold. Running on its own power, patiently waiting for someone to fill it. He pressed his palm against the carpet and felt it give properly beneath him. He turned a full circle in the center of the room. 13 years. Someone had spent 13 years making this. A footlocker under the bed. He pulled it out. Dark green. Heavy. On the front panel, stenciled in the same small, precise lettering he'd been looking at all evening, E. Harmon, his name, on a footlocker, in an underground room, in Montana, that he'd never known existed until tonight. He lifted the lid. On top, a sealed envelope with his name on the front, in that forward-leaning handwriting. Beneath it, a rolled set of blueprints tied with twine. Beneath those tools, a wrench set, a socket set in a molded case, a small hacksaw. He moved through these, quickly setting them aside. At the very bottom of the locker, he noticed the lining was slightly uneven, a faint ridge that suggested one section sat a few millimeters higher than the rest. Not storage he could access tonight. Not yet. Something to come back to when he knew more about what he was looking at. Tonight he had the envelope. He set the blueprints and tools aside. He picked up the envelope. His hands were steady. This surprised him, because the steadiness wasn't calm. It was the steadiness of someone holding something they understood on some level below language was going to change everything. The kind of steadiness that comes not from having nothing to fear, but from deciding that fear is not useful right now. He opened it. 4 pages, handwritten on cream-colored paper. The same small, precise script from the shelving labels, from the blueprint notation from the box at the bus depot. He read, Cole. He stopped. Read the first word again. Not Eli, not grandson, not to whom it may concern. Cole. His middle name. The name no one had called him since he was 5 years old, and didn't yet know he was about to become a ward of the state of Oregon. His throat closed, slightly. He kept reading. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're a man. I'm not good with words. I'm better with engines and concrete and things that hold their shape under pressure. But I'll try. They told you I surrendered you willingly. I made sure they would tell you that. It was the safest story for you to carry. Eli read that sentence 3 times. Your mother, Eleanor, was a good person. She was also a brave one, which in the wrong circumstances amounts to the same thing as being in danger. The man who fathered you, Garrett Harmon, worked as an internal accountant for a company called Apex Land Group. He kept records, detailed records, specific records of things that his employers needed to remain unrecorded. Garrett died in early 2010, an accident officially. I know what it was. Your mother found his records and understood immediately what they meant. She came to me because I was the only person in her life old enough and stubborn enough and with little enough left to lose. We were 3 weeks from getting the documentation to a federal prosecutor. A man named Aldous Wren runs Apex Land Group. He is the reason your parents are dead. Eli stopped, set the letter down on his knee, put one hand flat on the wool blanket beneath him, felt the roughness of it, the deliberate coarseness, the same texture he remembered from being 5 years old, pressed against his chin in a room that smelled like pine resin in something mechanical. He did not try to determine whether it was the same blanket or simply the same considered choice made twice by the same person. He sat with that question the way you sit with questions that don't have answers yet. He sat with that for 30 seconds, not thinking, just sitting. Then he picked the letter up and kept reading. When your mother died, I took you in because there was no one else and because you were hers. I kept you for 6 months while I figured out what to do. But they found us, not the police, the people who employ the police. Wren. I made a decision, the hardest one of my life. I gave Wren everything I had, my savings, my property in California, everything liquid I could convert. In exchange, he agreed to leave you alone. But the condition was that I disappear, and you had to disappear in a way that couldn't be traced back to me. The state system was the only answer. It is the last place men like Wren look for the grandchildren of men like me. You became a ward of Oregon. I became a ghost. I came here. I bought this land because I knew what was under it, which I will explain. And I built. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand that I chose your life over my right to be in it. Every year I was away from you was a year I chose on purpose. Not because I stopped loving you, because I never stopped. There is more. The blueprints will begin to explain it. But first go to the desk. There's a drawer on the right side. Pull it all the way out, and then come find what I built for you. Eli sat with the letter in his hands for a long time. The air circulators ran, quiet, steady. The refrigerator hummed. The lighting strip above held at a warm and even glow. Outside, somewhere above 2 feet of Montana soil and a concrete slab, the wind moved across 40 acres of land that looked like nothing from the road. The architecture of his life, the story he had built himself out of the fundamental fact of having been let go on purpose, sat in the center of his chest. He'd carried it so long he'd stopped noticing its weight. It had become structural. He'd built everything else around it. And now someone was telling him the load-bearing wall was wrong. The information was too large to process all at once. It required a kind of time that a cold night in Montana did not provide. So he set the feeling aside and did what he always did. He focused on the next immediate thing, the desk, right drawer. He crossed the room, pulled the drawer all the way out, not storage inside it. A small brass hook mounted to the interior back wall, and hanging from it, a key, small, plain, nothing like the iron key that had opened the padlock above. On a strip of masking tape beside the hook, written in the familiar hand, "Not yet. Read what's on the desk first." He looked at the desktop. One lamp, a small framed photograph face down, and an envelope propped against the base of the lamp. His name on the front. He picked up the photograph first, turned it over. Black and white, slightly grainy, developed without commercial equipment. A young woman, mid-20s, dark-haired, a wide smile that had nothing performed about it. The smile of someone who didn't know they were being watched, who had forgotten for one moment to manage how they appeared to the world. She was holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket, and the way her whole body angled toward it, protective, certain, the way you hold something you intend to keep and have never once imagined not keeping. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in Fletcher's handwriting, Eleanor Harmon, born March 15th, 1982, died October 4th, 2011, you at 4 months. Eli set the photograph down on the desk with great care, as if it could be damaged by the wrong kind of handling. He had never seen a picture of his mother holding him. He had seen exactly one photograph of his mother at all, a school photo, from a file, a teenager with a guarded expression, hair pulled back, eyes that already knew how to give nothing away. This was different. This was her being happy. This was her being someone's mother. Someone's whole world held in two hands like something she intended to keep. Her chin tilted down, her eyes completely soft. The kind of soft you can't fake and can't manufacture and can't take back once someone has seen it. He sat down in the desk chair, and he stayed there for a long time, not moving, not reading the second envelope, not thinking about Apex Land Group or keys hanging in drawers or blueprints rolled under the bed, just looking at a woman who had been 29 years old and brave enough to carry something dangerous because she thought it mattered. A woman who had stood in a dead man's apartment and found the truth and decided what to do with it. A woman who had no way of knowing, standing there, that she had 3 weeks left. That the thing she was carrying was going to cost her everything. And that the child she'd held in that photograph would one day sit in a room his grandfather built for him underground in Montana, holding the only image that existed of her face on an ordinary afternoon. Before all of it started. Before she had to be brave. When she was just someone's mother, and that was enough. Outside, Montana continued in its enormous indifference. The wind moved across the sage. The stars turned. The temperature dropped further. Eli Harmon, who had never had a home, sat in one. He just looked at the photograph, at the woman in it, at the way she held that baby, like she knew without knowing that holding on was the most important thing she would ever do. He sat there until the lamp on the desk felt warm, until the air circulators became a sound he wasn't hearing anymore because he was too used to it, until the weight in his chest stopped being something that hurt him and started being something he could carry. Then he reached for the second envelope and began to read. Part 2, Things Built to Last. The second letter was shorter than the first, which somehow made it harder to read. Cole, if you've made it here, you chose to know. That is not as common as people think. This is your home now. The power is geothermal. I drilled for it in 2013 and it has been stable since. The water comes from a deep aquifer, triple filtered, tested quarterly. The air is circulated and scrubbed. Every system is documented in the blue binders on the shelf, built to be maintained by one person with basic mechanical aptitude and the willingness to learn. I lived here for 13 years. The hut above was for appearances, a place for the county inspector, a place for Olin to drop supplies without knowing what he was supplying. Nobody ever looked further than the hut. Nobody ever had reason to. What I built here is yours completely, but there is still a decision to be made. The vault is through the door at the far end of the next module. What is in that vault will make the decision plain. There is money in it, enough for you to go anywhere, be anyone. Leave this behind entirely and build a life with no connection to any of this. That choice is real, and I will not think less of you for making it. But there is something else in it too, and the something else is why I brought you here. Sleep first. The decision has waited 13 years. It will wait one more night. Below my signature, one more thing. The combination to the vault is your mother's birthday and your own. 8 digits. March 15th, 1982. September 22nd, 2006. I expect you'll know what to do with that. Eli set the letter down. He looked at the photograph for a long time, at the woman in it, at the way she held that baby, at the smile that didn't know it was being recorded. He turned off the lamp. And in the warm, steady glow of the ceiling strips, in a room built for him by a man who'd had no other way to be near him, Eli Harmon lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. The air circulators ran their quiet cycle. Outside Montana continued, and he slept, properly, for the first time in longer than he could name. He was up before the lights. The ceiling timer had the room at low amber when he opened his eyes. He lay still for a moment, cataloging the sounds, the air systems, the refrigerator, the faint vibration of something mechanical running correctly. No voices through walls that belonged to other people. No institutional clock measuring out the day in equal portions. No footsteps in a hallway outside a door that didn't lock from the inside. Just systems, doing exactly what they were designed to do. He made coffee from a sealed canister in the cabinet. A small electric percolator cleaned and left ready. The coffee was dark and slightly bitter and the best thing he'd tasted in 3 days. He sat at the kitchen counter with the blue binder labeled Systems Overview and read for an hour before he let himself think about the vault. The binder was thorough in a way that revealed a particular cast of mind. Fletcher had documented everything. The geothermal heat exchanger and its maintenance schedule, the water filtration array with a separate section on testing frequency and acceptable mineral profiles, the air circulation system, HEPA filtration, carbon exchange unit, media replacement every 18 months, electrical systems, backup battery banks, load calculations for adding or removing draws from the grid, every page written in the same economical hand, detailed without being dense, precise without being cold. This was not the writing of someone who wanted to impress. This was the writing of someone who wanted to be useful, who had thought carefully about what a single person working alone would need to know, and had tried to give them exactly that and nothing more. He put the binder back, rinsed his cup, and went to find the vault. The door at the far end of the habitation space was deliberately unremarkable. Standard interior, nothing on it, no label, easy to overlook if you weren't looking for it, which was the point entirely. Behind it, a short connecting corridor, and then another submarine-style door identical to the one at the base of the stairs. When he turned the wheel and pushed it open, the air that moved over him was different again. Cold and humid and richly, specifically alive. The smell of green things, of earth, of soil with organisms doing invisible labor. He'd encountered a smell like it exactly once a school field trip to a botanical garden when he was 9, standing outside a greenhouse with his face pressed toward the gap in the door to get more of it. He stepped inside. The hydroponics module. Same Quonset footprint as the others, but entirely different in quality. The curved walls lined with wire shelving, tier on tier, and on every tier trays of growing medium supporting plants at various stages. Lettuce in a dozen varieties. Tomato plants staked and trained along wire guides, small green fruits clustering at the nodes. Peppers beginning to color. Herbs along the lower shelves dense and fragrant. Swiss chard with stems the color of traffic signals. Beans climbing a lattice that ran the full length of one wall. Above everything, full spectrum grow lights in long horizontal banks, their warm white glow giving the room the quality of a perpetual afternoon. Eli walked slowly through the rows, running his hand along the edge of a tray, the growing medium slightly damp at his fingertips. Everything thriving, not just surviving, actually thriving the way living things thrive when someone has paid attention to what they need. At the far end, another door, and beside it on the floor, wire crates of preserved goods in glass jars. Hundreds of them, pickled vegetables, pressure canned fruit, dried beans and grains. The stores of a man who had thought carefully about time, about the distance between what you have now and what you will need. He stood there for a long moment, in the middle of the plants, in the warm light, in the smell of living things. 13 years. He built this and lived inside it, alone, tended it, maintained it, ate from it, and never told a single person any of it existed. The vault entrance was where the second blueprint said it would be. Behind the storage shelving unit in the far corner of the hut, the one labeled spare parts in familiar handwriting. An empty container on the third shelf. Inside it, a simple bar handle worn smooth at the grip. He pulled it. A soft click. The entire shelving unit shifted forward by half an inch. He pushed. It swung outward on hidden casters with the easy precision of something built by someone who understood tolerances. Who knew that a mechanism you have to fight is a mechanism that will eventually fail you at exactly the wrong moment? Behind it, the flat interior wall of the Quonset hut replaced here with a steel plate. In the center, a combination lock. Heavy, institutional, 8 digits. His mother's birthday and his own. 1503 1982, then 22092006. Each correct position engaged with a small internal confirmation. On the final number, a deliberate and irrevocable thud from somewhere inside the mechanism, and the handle disengaged. He pulled the door open. The air inside was cold, dry, maintained at a temperature designed to preserve paper and electronics. The air of a place built around the importance of what it was storing. Filing cabinets floor to ceiling, each drawer labeled in Fletcher's hand. Soil samples with date and GPS coordinates. Water table readings quarterly spanning 11 years. Corporate filings for Apex Land Group. Shell company records. Financial analysis. Aerial photography of sites he didn't yet recognize. Against the opposite wall, hard-sided cases. Black, identical, stacked 4 high and 3 deep. He opened the nearest one. Cash. Vacuum-sealed bricks of $100 bills. Arranged with the same methodical care as everything else Fletcher Dunn had ever built or stored or documented. He opened a second case. A third. All the same. He didn't count it. Couldn't have with any accuracy. He closed the cases and stepped back. On the steel work table in the center of the room, a laptop closed plugged in, a leather-bound ledger, and a small digital voice recorder with a strip of masking tape on the face. The tape read in the familiar hand, "Play me first." He picked it up and pressed play. The voice that came from the small speaker was low and deliberate, unhurried, slightly roughened by age and by the quality of a voice that has spoken mostly to itself for many years. It carried the cadence of a man who had decided what he wanted to say and was going to say it in the order he had chosen, without detour, without performance. Cole, if you're hearing this, you found the vault, which means you read the letters, which means you know most of what I need you to know. but there are things I couldn't put on paper. And those are what I'm going to tell you now. A pause. Your father's name was Garrett Harmon. He wasn't a bad man, not fundamentally. He was a man who made a practical choice and discovered too late that what he'd chosen to look away from was larger than he'd understood. He kept records because he was an accountant, and keeping records was what he knew. I believe in the end, he kept them also because some part of him understood that what he was involved in needed to be witnessed, even if only in columns of numbers on paper that no one else would ever read. Eli sat down on the floor of the vault, back against the wall of filing cabinets, and listened. Aldous Wren owns Apex Land Group. What Apex does officially is acquire and develop remote land parcels for resort and residential projects. What it actually does and has done for over 2 decades is operate as a disposal service for industrial waste that cannot be handled through legal channels. Chemical manufacturing byproducts, petroleum refining residue, agricultural runoff concentrates from operations that would face federal penalties for standard disposal. Wren's network purchases remote land through a rotating series of shell corporations, uses each parcel as a burial site, moves on. The shells are dissolved after each transaction. The chain of ownership is designed to be impenetrable. Another pause. Longer. Your father documented all of it, not initially as an act of courage, as professional habit. Then something shifted in him. He started making copies. He made them in a way that suggested he intended someone eventually to read them. They killed him before he could do anything with what he had. The recording ran for a moment with only the sound of Fletcher breathing. Slow, controlled. Your mother found the copies in his belongings. She understood immediately what they were. She brought them to me. We were 3 weeks from a federal prosecutor. Then she died. Eli's hands were still on his knees. I went to ground. I brought everything here. I spent the next 13 years building what you're sitting in right now, and building the case that the cabinets behind you represent. The evidence is complete. Soil samples from 11 burial sites, including 3 on this property, showing contamination profiles that match the industrial sources in your father's records. Water table data showing migration of those contaminants toward municipal supply aquifers. Corporate records tracing the shell company network to Wren's personal holding entities. It is everything a prosecutor needs. It has been everything a prosecutor needs for at least 4 years. I could not take it forward myself because I am officially a dead man. And because Wren has resources I do not. To bring this case forward, you need someone who can operate in the legal world. Someone with standing, with personal motivation sufficient to match the risk. There is a woman named Petra Calloway. Eli looked up. She is my attorney of record for the estate, which is how you know her name. But that is not all she is. Her mother, Vivian Calloway, was an independent environmental investigator. In 2008, Vivian began documenting a pattern of land acquisitions in Montana and Wyoming that matched the signature of Wren's operation. In 2009, she died. A car accident officially. I know what it was. Petra Calloway went to law school 2 years after her mother's death. I know why she went. She does not know that I know. She does not know about this place, or this evidence, or the connection between her mother's investigation and what is in those cabinets. When you tell her, she will understand immediately what she is looking at. She is not a tool for you to use. She is a person with her own obligation to this as real as yours. Approach her as an equal. A longer pause. The sound of a breath taken carefully. In the cases against the wall, there is enough money to give you a real-life call. Built on your own terms. I built that option deliberately because I had no right to draft you into a war that isn't technically yours. But your parents are dead because of Aldous Wren. And 47,000 people in this county and the ones adjacent are drinking water that is being quietly poisoned by what he buried under this land and land like it. Those are facts that exist whether or not you choose to act on them. I have given you the battlefield. I have given you everything I know. What you do with it is yours alone. One more thing. The password for the encrypted partition on the laptop is in the blue binder. Page 112. The footnote. It looks like a maintenance specification. It is the key to everything on that drive that I couldn't put in the physical files. Take care of the plants. The basil needs thinning. The recording stopped. Eli sat on the floor of the vault for a long time, the filing cabinets behind him, the cases to his left, the laptop waiting on the table. He thought about 47,000 people. He thought about his mother at 29 years old, standing in a dead man's apartment, holding a ledger, deciding what to do with it. He thought about a man who had spent 13 years in a hole in the ground, making a case he couldn't close himself, waiting for someone who might not come and might not choose to stay. He stood up, went to the laptop, found page 112 of the blue binder, read the footnote, a dense technical specification about filtration baseline parameters, a long alphanumeric string embedded in it like camouflage. He typed it in. The encrypted partition opened, and he began to read. He called Petra Calloway at 8 the next morning. Her voice was the same as it had been on the payphone. Efficient. The mild patience of someone who expected this call to be about a straightforward decision about $12,000. Mr. Harmon, she said, have you had time to consider the offer? I've been inside the property, he said. All of it. I know what my grandfather built here, and I know what he built it for. A pause. Professional. I see, she said. I know about Apex Land Group, he said. I know about Aldous Wren, and I know about your mother. The silence that followed was different from her professional pauses. It was not the silence of someone choosing words. It was the silence of someone who had stopped breathing. What did you say? She said. I have the evidence, he said. 13 years of documentation, physical samples, financial records, corporate filings tracing Wren's network to 11 disposal sites across 6 states, a ledger kept by my father, and digital files on an encrypted drive that cross-reference everything. He could hear her, the quality of the quiet on the line. Your mother's investigation in 2008 was correct, he said. Everything she suspected was real. I have the records that prove it. She made a sound he couldn't categorize. Not a breath, not a word. Something between the two. I'm not calling to ask for help, he said. I'm calling because my grandfather's notes say you've been waiting for this. I think we both have something the other needs. I think we should talk in person. I'll be there tomorrow morning, she said, and the professional cadence was entirely gone from her voice. Something older was underneath it. The voice of a person who had been holding something at careful distance for a very long time and had just felt it move closer. She arrived at 9 the next morning in a dark blue Subaru that had seen considerable Montana winter. She was younger than her phone voice suggested. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that evaluated the Quonset hut quickly and without sentimentality. The eyes of someone who assessed situations before committing to them, who had learned the hard way that commitment was expensive and information was cheap. She took in the dimensions of the hut, the lack of windows, the concrete pad. Show me, she said. Not this is extraordinary, not I can't believe it, just show me. He respected that immediately and completely. He showed her everything. He watched her face as she descended the stairs for the first time, as she stood in the warm light of the habitation module and processed what she was looking at. The professional composure she wore as naturally as clothing slipped, just briefly, and what replaced it was something unguarded and genuine and entirely human. In the hydroponics module, she stopped at a row of tomato plants and stood there without speaking for nearly a full minute, her hand resting on the edge of a tray. In the vault, she moved differently from how she moved anywhere else. She opened the filing cabinets one by one, read the labels, pulled drawers, handled documents with the attention of someone who understood their legal weight precisely. She spent 40 minutes with the ledger sitting at the work table with her coat still on, turning pages, slowly making notes on a legal pad she'd brought from her car. She focused on the operational files, the labeled drawers, the systematic evidence. The vault was dense with information, and she worked through it methodically, the way she'd been trained to work through everything. Then she found it. A photograph, small, black and white, clipped to the inside cover of a file from 2008, tucked behind a sheaf of documents in a way that was easy to miss if you were moving through the materials quickly. Easy to miss unless you pulled the file all the way out and let the cover fall open. A woman, maybe 50, short hair, standing on a piece of land with mountains behind her and monitoring equipment in front of her. The kind of equipment you use when you suspect something is wrong and you're trying to prove it. Petra went completely still. "That's my mother," she said. Eli said nothing. "That's Vivian." She didn't look up from the photograph. "She's holding a water sampling kit. I gave her that kit for her birthday." A long pause. 2 months before she died. She set the file down, very carefully. She looked at Eli across the work table. "He knew her," she said. "They worked together," Eli said. "According to the recording, he didn't say for how long. She never mentioned him." Petra's voice was flat, but not cold. The flatness of someone compressing something large into a space it didn't quite fit. "She didn't mention a lot of things toward the end. I thought it was because she was being careful." Another pause. "I thought it meant she was getting close to something." "She was," Eli said. Petra looked at the photograph for another moment. Then she set it down. And when she looked up again, her face had settled into something that was not calm, but had the quality of a decision being made and held firmly. "My father spent years trying to help her," she said. "After she died, Ren's people went after him. They fabricated a professional misconduct case, used every connection they had to make it stick. He spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name and never fully did." She picked up the ledger again. "He died in 2018, still fighting it, still trying to prove what they'd done to him." She looked at the filing cabinets. "Your grandfather has 12 shell companies documented. I had 3. She ran her hand along the drawer fronts, not opening them, just acknowledging them. "How long have you been down here?" she said. "Going through this?" "Since yesterday." She studied him with the attention of someone recalibrating an assessment made too quickly. "You're 18 years old," she said. "I'm aware." "That's not criticism," she said. "That's me trying to catch up." She came back the next morning, and the morning after that. They developed a rhythm quickly. She understood the legal architecture, evidentiary standards, procedural landscape, the geography of what was prosecutable and what was merely damning. He understood the physical evidence. He'd spent days inside the filing cabinets in the encrypted partition before she arrived. He could answer specific questions about where a particular document sat in the larger structure of what Fletcher had built. They didn't become close exactly. They became effective, which is its own kind of relationship built on mutual recognition of competence rather than personal history. And then on the 4th morning, Eli found the drawer. Bottom of the work table, a small keyed lock. On the key ring Fletcher had left for the vault, one key labeled with a single handwritten character J. He'd assumed it stood for journal, the way Fletcher labeled everything economically with the minimum necessary information. He opened the drawer, inside a single object, a journal bound in brown leather. The cover worn to softness from years of handling. No label on the outside. He lifted it and felt the weight of it, the density of pages written on consistently over a long period of time. He sat down at the table and opened it to the first page. January 2012. The handwriting was Fletcher's smaller than his other writing, more compressed. Like he'd understood when he started that there would be a great deal to fit, and the space was finite. January 2012. Cole is 6 years old. He has been in the first placement for 3 weeks. The investigator's report says the family is adequate, attentive without being warm. She says Cole is adjusting. I do not know what that means for a 6-year-old who has lost his mother and been handed to strangers by his grandfather. I suspect it means he is doing what he has to do. He is Eleanor's son. He will do what he has to do. Eli sat with that for a moment, then turned the page. March 2012. The investigator saw him at school pickup, said he looks healthy, said he has a friend, a boy named Darren, who shares his table in the classroom. I wrote the name down. Darren. I don't know why I wrote it down. It seemed important to know that he had a friend named Darren. He turned more pages. August 2014. Cole is 8. Third placement. The second ended because the family relocated. He did not initiate the disruption, and he did not, according to the investigator, seem surprised by it. This worries me more than if he had cried. A child who expects to be moved has learned something about the world that is very difficult to unlearn. I want to drive to Oregon. I remind myself that I cannot. Not yet. Not safely. The word yet is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and I know it. Eli turned to April 2019. Cole is 13. He was in a fight at school. The report says he defended another student who was being bullied. He was suspended for 3 days. The foster family at the current placement made it a difficult week for him afterward. I wish I could tell him that he did the right thing, and the consequence was unjust. I have no way to tell him anything. I light the stove and I sit here and I talk to the air sometimes, which I recognize is not a thing a sane man does. I do it anyway. Eli stopped on that page. He read the line again. I sit here and I talk to the air. He thought about a man, alone in an underground room in Montana, talking to the air because there was no other available way to reach a 13-year-old boy in Oregon who had just served a 3-day suspension for protecting someone smaller than himself and had no one to tell him he'd done the right thing. The stone that had lived in the center of his chest for as long as he could remember was still there. It had not gotten lighter, but it had changed what it meant. He turned to the last entry. September 2024. Cole will be 18 in 6 weeks. I have instructed Petra Calloway to hold the estate notification until his birthday. Everything is ready. I have been doing this for 13 years. I am tired in the way a machine is tired when it has been running at high capacity for longer than its design load. Not broken, just at the limit. I do not know if he will come. I do not know if he will read the letters or turn down the money or choose to stay. I built all of this hoping he would. But hoping and knowing are different things, and I have been honest with myself about that from the beginning. He may look at a tin shed on 40 acres of Montana and see exactly what it appears to be. But I have watched him for 13 years. I have watched him move through 7 homes without losing whatever it is he is made of. I have watched him teach himself things from library books and defend other people's children and make decisions without anyone to consult. He is Eleanor's son. He is also, I allow myself to think, something that I had some part in, however far away. If you are reading this, Cole, then you came. And if you came, then you stayed long enough to find this, which means you already know what you chose to do. And I already know I was right to believe you would choose it. I am proud of you. Not for what you have done, though. I expect by now you have done something worth being proud of. I am proud of you for surviving the 13 years before any of this. That belonged entirely to you. The entry ended there. Eli closed the journal. He sat at the table in the cold vault for a long time, not moving. The journal in his hands, the air circulators running their cycle, the lights holding steady above him. He had thought he was alone. He had built himself around that fact the way you build around a structural wall, incorporating it into everything else because everything else rested on it. The wall had never existed. He had never been alone. He had been watched imperfectly at enormous distance by a man sitting in an underground room talking to the air, paying an investigator to report details, writing them down in a brown leather journal because writing them down was the only thing available to him. Every placement, every year, every small fact about his life that a private investigator could observe from the outside and report back. A friend named Darren, a school report about thoroughness. A boy teaching himself to read a blueprint from a library book. All of it written down, kept in a cabinet in a room underground in Montana because there was nowhere else to put it. He stood up and went through the corridor, through the habitation module, up the stairs, out of the hut, and into the Montana afternoon. The sky enormous and pale, the sage running out to the fence line, a hawk moving in patient circles above the eastern ridge. And 20 miles east, invisible from here, Harlow going about its day, residents turning on their taps, filling pots, making coffee, giving their children glasses of water. 47,000 people. He went back inside. That afternoon, he found the last envelope. Not in the vault, in the footlocker under the bed in the section he'd sorted through on the first night without fully examining the bottom. When he pulled the lining back carefully, the seam he'd noticed before revealed itself as a separate compartment. Shallow, just deep enough for one flat envelope. A plain white envelope. On the outside, written in a hand he had not seen before in any of the documents, for my son when he is old enough to read this. Not Fletcher's handwriting, Eleanor's. His hands went still, not from calm, from the very specific kind of stillness that arrives when a person's body understands before their mind does that what they're holding is irreplaceable. The last thing. The thing that comes after everything else. He sat on the bed, the envelope on his knee, the habitation module warm and quiet around him. The plants growing in the next room, the systems running their cycles. He opened it. The letter was 3 pages, written on paper from a legal pad, the yellow lines showing faintly through the handwriting. The pen had been pressed firmly as if she wanted the words to go all the way through. If you're reading this, then I wasn't able to give it to you myself. And I'm sorry for that, more than I know how to say. I'm not going to write about what's happening. You'll know enough by the time you find this. Your grandfather will have made sure of that. I'm going to write about a Tuesday in February. You were 4 months old. We were in the apartment on Sycamore Street. You remember nothing about that apartment? That's okay. I remember enough for both of us. It was afternoon, one of those winter afternoons where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look like it's inside a painting. You had been fed, you were clean, you were not crying. You were just lying in my arms doing that thing that babies do where they exist completely. Not thinking about anything, not planning anything, just entirely, absolutely there. And I thought sitting in that sideways light with my 4-month-old son, who had no idea yet what the world was going to ask of him, I thought if I only ever get to do one thing right in my entire life, this is it. This exact moment, this specific Tuesday. I know that sounds like not enough, but it was the most I had ever felt. And I wanted you to know that you were the source of it. Not something I was doing, not somewhere I was going. You. I don't know what you're facing when you read this. I don't know what the world has asked of you, but I know you're Fletcher's grandson, which means you are stubborn and specific, and you do not give up on things that matter. I also know you're mine, which means you care more than you let anyone see, and you will do the right thing even when it costs you. Especially then, you came from that Tuesday afternoon, from that sideways light. Whatever is happening now, wherever you are, I want you to know that somewhere in your very beginning, before any of this, there was a moment that was entirely simple. You were held, you were warm, and someone loved you so much it felt like it was going to come apart at the seams. That's still true, even now, even from here. All my love, always. Your mother. Eli sat with the letter in his hands. The room was completely quiet except for the air. He didn't cry. He did something else, something without a name. He sat with the full weight of what he was holding and let it settle into him slowly. The way water settles into dry ground, without rushing. The way some things need time to become part of you rather than just things you know. When Petra arrived the next morning, she found him at the kitchen counter with the letter open beside his coffee. She stopped in the doorway, read his face, didn't ask. I found a letter, he said, from my mother. Okay, she said. She sat down at the other end of the counter, poured herself coffee, didn't fill the silence with anything, which was, Eli thought, exactly the right thing to do. After a while, he said, she was 29 years old. Yes, Petra said. She had it, all of it, right in her hands, and she needed 3 more days. Yes. He folded the letter carefully, set it aside, picked up his coffee. I want to finish it, he said. Petra looked at him. I know. FBI is not an option. Fletcher's notes say Wren has contacts at the regional level, 2009 when your mother died. The investigation was flagged internally before it could go anywhere. Petra's jaw tightened slightly. I suspected as much. So we don't go directly to federal authorities, Eli said. We go to the soil scientists first, get independent confirmation on the contamination data before anything else moves. Then we brief the journalists and EPA simultaneously. Public record gets established before anyone can move to suppress it. Petra studied him. You worked this out last night, she said. Fletcher laid most of it out. I adjusted for the FBI complication. She was quiet for a moment, assessing, recalibrating. 6 weeks, she said, to prepare the packages properly. I know. Wren is going to know you're here before then. He already does, Eli said. Or he will soon, which means we move quickly and we don't make mistakes, because we're going to get exactly one chance at this. She looked at him for a moment longer. You're 18 years old, she said. You've said that. I keep saying it, she said, because I keep forgetting. Wren knew on day 11. Eli was reviewing the water table data when the motion sensor on the exterior camera triggered. Not Olin, not a county vehicle. 3 men in a white pickup truck pulling onto the property access road at 7 in the morning, carrying equipment cases, dressed in inspection vests with a logo Eli didn't recognize. He watched them on the laptop screen. Still, not moving. They had paperwork. One of them held it up to the gate camera, not knowing it was a camera. It looked official. It was not official. Fletcher had filed the necessary registrations years ago specifically to complicate exactly this kind of move. He called Petra. 3 men, he said. White truck, inspection vests. They have a document that looks like a county work order. Fabricated, she said immediately. Harmon County hasn't issued any orders on that parcel. I've been monitoring the docket. I know it's fabricated, he said. What are they doing now? Coming through the gate. A pause. Eli. I'm fine, he said. I'm underground. They can't see me, but they have drilling equipment in the truck bed. The silence on the line was sharp. She was thinking fast. He could hear it. They're not looking for contamination evidence, she said. They know it's there. They're looking for the vault, he said. For the evidence. Is there another exit? He was already moving. Fletcher built one north end, maintenance access installed in 2016. I read about it in the blue binder. How far does it come out? 40 feet north of the hut, behind the ridgeline. They won't see me from where they're parked. Go, she said. He went. The north tunnel was narrower than the main staircase, low-ceilinged, concrete, running slightly uphill toward a steel hatch that opened with a push bar from below. He pressed it. Cold air fell in, dry, sharp, the smell of sage and open ground. He climbed out, closed the hatch, lay flat on the ground behind the ridge, looked back toward the hut. 2 of the men were at the front, one unloading the drilling rig, another consulting the documents. The third standing at the truck watching the access road. Alert, professional, not random employees, people who did this kind of thing and had done it before. He called Petra back. I'm out, he said. North of the ridge. I can see them. Stay there. Don't make contact. I'm not planning to. Eli. Her voice changed slightly, still controlled, but with something underneath it she hadn't let him hear before. Are you all right? He thought about that for a moment, lying flat on cold Montana ground with three men 40 feet away going through a dead man's property, looking for evidence that would disappear if they found it. Yeah, he said, I'm fine. And he meant it. Because he was frightened, he could feel it, the cold clarity of genuine danger. But underneath the fear was something else. Something that had been building for 11 days. Since the first night he'd sat on the bed and looked at the photograph. Since he'd read the recording and the files. Since he'd opened the brown leather journal and read the words, I sit here and I talk to the air. Under the fear was something solid. He knew what he was doing. He knew why. And he knew that what was in that vault was not going to be found today. Because Fletcher had built things that held their shape under pressure. And so apparently had he. The three men spent 4 hours on the property. They drilled 2 cores in the western section, took their samples, photographed the hut exterior, found nothing beyond what was listed in the county records: 1 outbuilding, 1 wood stove, some dry goods, a cot. They left at 2 in the afternoon. Eli waited 20 minutes after the truck disappeared before going back in. Olin Raleigh showed up 2 days later. Not with supplies, with his hat in his hands. He stood at the base of the rise, looking at the ground, then at Eli in the doorway. White pickup, Olin said. I saw it on the road 2 days ago. Eli waited. Olin looked up. His eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. They came to see me first, Olin said. About a month ago, couple of weeks before you even arrived. What did they want? Information about the property, about Fletcher, about the access road, whether there was anything unusual. What did you tell them? Nothing, at first. Olin set his hands in his jacket pockets. Then they found my son. Cass works for a supply company in Billings. One of their biggest contracts is with a property management firm that runs network controls. They made it very clear what would happen to Cass's job if I wasn't more helpful. Eli looked at him for a long moment. So you told them. I told them the access road, the general layout, that Fletcher had kept to himself. Nothing I shouldn't have known from the road. He met Eli's eyes. I didn't tell them about the inside of the hut, because I didn't know about the inside of the hut. Eli stepped down from the doorway, walked to the base of the rise, stood in front of Olin. Olin didn't look away, which cost him something. Eli could see that. He was a man who didn't make excuses for himself, which was both admirable and irrelevant right now. Fletcher used to say something, Olin said. First time I came out here, he met me at the gate, just that once. He paused. He said the land remembers everything. People forget because they want to. The land doesn't have that option. Eli said nothing. I'm not asking you to trust me, Olin said. I'm asking if there's something I can do that would be useful. Not to make it even. Nothing's even. But because Cass came home last night and told me he'd put in his notice. He stopped, cleared his throat. Said he couldn't keep working for people like that. Said he'd rather figure something else out. The wind moved through the sage, long, slow. Your son quit, Eli said. Last night, yes. Eli thought about a young man making a decision without anyone telling him to, without knowing the full picture, just deciding that some things cost more than the paycheck and the cost was not worth it. I may need someone who can move around town without drawing attention, Eli said. Pick things up, make certain drop-offs, things that keep me from having to show my face in places I'd rather not be seen. Olin nodded, once. Precise. Cass too, Eli said. If he's willing. He'll be willing. Eli looked at the older man for a moment longer, then turned and went back up the rise. At the top he stopped, didn't look back. The land remembers everything, he said. That means it remembers this too. He went inside and went back to work. Part 3. The truth doesn't die underground. The file was labeled Phase 2 Financial Model. Eli found it on a Thursday morning 3 weeks into the encrypted partition. 3 weeks of long days and cold coffee and the tunnel vision that sets in when you understand that every document you're looking at is a piece of something much larger than it first appeared. He'd been working through the financial records, the shell company structures, the billing entities, the way money moved from industrial clients through Wren's network, like water through a system designed to be untraceable, clean on the surface, completely deliberate underneath. And then he opened Phase 2 and sat back and read it again, and then once more, slowly, like he needed his eyes to confirm what his brain was already telling him. He called Petra. "Come down," he said. "Now." "I'm in the middle of—" "Now, Petra." A pause, the sound of a chair. "I'm 20 minutes out," she said. She made it in 15. He was still at the desk when she came through the vault door, still reading. The laptop screen reflected in his eyes. She crossed the room without speaking and looked at the screen over his shoulder. 30 seconds of silence. Then he engineered it. Yes, he didn't just bury the waste and walk away. No. She pulled the other chair up, sat down, read. Because this was the part Fletcher hadn't fully articulated in the recording. The part that was in the financial model. The part that required the encrypted partition to understand completely. Not just what Wren had buried, but why he'd buried it the way he had. Apex Land Group didn't acquire remote parcels to hide toxic waste and hope no one found it. They acquired remote parcels specifically chosen for their geological position upstream from municipal water supplies. They buried the waste at depths and in volumes calculated to migrate slowly, predictably, toward the aquifer, toward the supply lines, toward the tap. And then they waited. Because the cleanup contracts, the federal remediation programs that triggered when a municipal water supply tested positive for industrial contamination, those contracts were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And Apex Land Group, through a separate set of subsidiaries with no official connection to the acquisition entities, had been positioning themselves for 2 years to be the lead contractor for the cleanup of the very contamination they had caused. Catastrophe as business plan. Disaster as investment. 47,000 people in Harlow and 4 adjacent counties drinking water poisoned on a schedule. A schedule designed by engineers hired by a man who then planned to stand up and offer to fix it, at federal expense, with a profit margin of 31%. The remediation bid, Petra said. Files in the 3rd subdirectory, Eli said. 18 months in preparation. They're planning to submit it in 6 weeks. Petra looked at the screen. 6 weeks, she said, which is the same deadline we already have. She was quiet for a moment, running it, all of it. Your mother identified this, she said. Not a question. Page 47 of her notes, Eli said. In your father's file, she found the connection between the acquisition companies and the remediation subsidiaries. She called it a closed-loop liability system. Her words, exact phrase. Petra said nothing. She needed 3 more days, Eli said. She had a meeting scheduled with the federal prosecutor, October 7th, 2011. She died October 4th. Yes. The vault was very quiet. She was standing right on top of it, Petra said. Not to Eli, mostly to herself. She had it. She did. Petra straightened, set her legal pad on the table, clicked her pen. Tell me about the geological confirmation, she said. And they went back to work. The strategy had 2 phases. Eli's modification of what Fletcher had outlined, because Fletcher's original plan was built before they knew about the FBI complication, before they knew that Wren had people inside the regional office who had been useful in 2009 and would be useful again. Phase 1, the scientists. 3 independent researchers, 2 soil contamination specialists, and 1 hydrogeologist. None with any prior connection to Apex Land Group or any of its subsidiaries. Petra had identified them over 2 weeks, vetted through academic publications, grant histories, professional affiliations. People who existed entirely outside the system Wren had spent 20 years learning to navigate. They would receive the physical samples and the water table data first, before anything else moved, before any journalist saw a document, before EPA received a single file, independent scientific confirmation, on the record, under their names. Because evidence without context is just information, and information without credibility is just noise. And noise was something Wren's legal team could drown out in about 48 hours. But if three scientists with credentials and reputations and institutional affiliations had already confirmed the contamination data before the first story ran, the noise became signal. And signal was something else entirely. Phase 2 came 48 hours after the scientists confirmed. Two investigative journalists, EPA Regional Office in Denver, one state-level federal prosecutor, a woman named Margaret O.C., who Petra had spent 6 years watching from a distance and had concluded was the specific kind of clean that comes not from inexperience, but from principle. All three simultaneous. All three on a Wednesday morning. The timing matters, Petra said on the last night before they sent the Phase 1 packages. I know. Wednesday because the news cycle has the longest runway before the weekend. Gives the story time to breathe and expand before anyone can move to suppress it on a Friday afternoon when the relevant people are unavailable. Fletcher mentioned Wednesday in the recording, Eli said. She paused. He thought of that. He thought of most things. She looked at the vault around her, at the filing cabinets, at the cases stacked against the wall, at the room that had been a dead man's life's work for 13 years. He thought of everything except how to get it across the finish line himself, she said. He couldn't, Eli said. He needed someone who existed, someone who was legally real. He needed you. He needed both of us. She looked at him across the work table, the lamp between them, the ledger closed, the laptop ready. My mother needed both of us too, she said. She just didn't know we existed yet. The Phase 1 packages went out on a Monday. Eli drove them to Billings himself. Cass Raleigh drove him, a quiet young man with his father's hands and none of his father's hesitation. They didn't speak much on the 2-hour drive, which suited both of them. 3 packages, registered mail, return addresses to Petra's firm, each containing soil sample data, water table readings, lab methodologies, chain of custody documentation. On the way back somewhere outside of Roundup, Cass said, "My dad feels terrible about what he told them." Eli looked out the window, sagebrush and distance. "I know," he said. "He's been out here every other day since you talked to him, fixing things. He rebuilt the gate hinge. He doesn't even know if you noticed." Eli had noticed. "Tell him I noticed," he said. Cass nodded, and they drove the rest of the way in a silence that had something comfortable in it. Two people who understood that some things don't need to be said out loud to be true. The confirmation calls came in 47 hours. Not 48, 47. Because the hydrogeologist, a woman named Dr. Reeves at the University of Montana, had worked through the night. She called Petra at 6 in the morning. Eli was in the hydroponics module when Petra came through. Dr. Reeves confirmed, she said. Full corroboration. The contamination profiles match the industrial source records exactly. She used the phrase textbook migration pattern. She wants to know if she can publish. Tell her yes, Eli said. After Wednesday. Petra was already dialing the second scientist. By 9 in the morning, all three had confirmed. By 9:15, the packages were in transit. Digital files sent through encrypted channels to the journalists and EPA simultaneously. Physical documentation packages already en route to Margaret Osei's office via courier. The Wednesday morning news cycle about to start with something it didn't know was coming. Eli sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee. He thought about his father, sitting at a desk somewhere, looking at numbers that told him what was happening, making a copy, and then another. Not heroically, just quietly, because he couldn't not. He thought about his mother, standing in a dead man's apartment, holding a ledger, deciding. He thought about Fletcher, down here, in this room, for 13 years. All of them pointing in the same direction without being able to see each other. All of them carrying the same piece of the same thing toward a finish line. None of them knew exactly where it was. And here, Wednesday morning, his phone buzzed. Petra. First package confirmed delivered, she said. Okay. Eli. Yeah, we're in it now. Once this moves, we can't pull it back. I know. Are you sure? He looked at the photograph on the desk. His mother. The sideways Tuesday light. The baby she was holding like something she intended to keep. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. The first story ran 41 hours after they sent the packages, which was faster than Petra had predicted and slower than Eli had feared. It appeared on a Thursday afternoon, published by a journalist named Tom Birch who covered environmental compliance failures across the Mountain West. The language was careful, responsible, the kind of careful that comes from someone who understood exactly what they were carrying and knew that getting it wrong would be worse than not printing it at all. But the substance was there, all of it. Shell corporations and burial sites and a network of acquired parcels across 6 states. The name Aldous Wren appeared in print for the first time in connection with anything criminal. Eli read it at the kitchen counter. 3 times. Every specific claim checked against the documentation. Every figure accurate. Every connection properly drawn. Not a single error. He put the laptop down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then his phone rang. Number he didn't recognize. He answered. The voice on the other end was measured, unhurried. The voice of a man who had spent decades being the person in the room who didn't need to raise his voice to make everyone else aware of exactly how much was at stake. Mr. Harmon, my name is Aldous Wren. I think it's time we spoke directly. Eli said nothing, just listened. Because this was the moment he'd been thinking about for 6 weeks. He'd thought about what it would feel like to hear this voice. Whether some part of him would respond to the number being offered the way a person sometimes responds to a threat they've been anticipating with relief that it's finally here. It was exactly what he'd expected, and somehow that was the most useful thing. I understand you've recently come into possession of certain materials, Wren said. Materials that have found their way to some journalists and a federal agency. I want you to understand that I don't hold you personally responsible. You're a young man who inherited a complicated situation. Eli let him finish. I'm prepared to resolve this cleanly, Wren said. $10 million transferred to an account of your choosing, in exchange for a public statement clarifying that the documents were misrepresented to you. He paused, giving Eli time to absorb the number. Eli thought about Fletcher, who had turned down $10,000. My grandfather turned down $10,000, Eli said. I'm going to turn down $10 million. I'd appreciate it if you didn't call this number again. He ended the call, set the phone down on the counter, sat with his hands flat on the table, breathing, the way you breathe after something large has passed through the room. The kitchen was warm, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the adjacent module, the grow lights ran their cycle. He picked up his coffee, drank it, and went back to the laptop. The second story ran that afternoon. Different journalist, Washington-based, national audience. Less careful in tone and more precise in substance, the writing of someone who had reviewed the financial model and understood exactly what the numbers meant. The shell company network laid out in a diagram. 12 entities, the beneficial ownership structure pointing at every level to the same person. By evening, 3 more outlets had picked it up. Then 4 more, each one adding something a former Apex employee speaking on background, a retired EPA official who had flagged irregularities in several of the relevant parcels years earlier and been unable to build a case from publicly available data. A water testing company that had been contracted to run samples in Harlow 18 months prior and had found results they'd been told to reclassify. The narrative Wren had maintained through 2 decades of institutional connection and legal intimidation was not crumbling in a single moment. It was disaggregating, piece by piece, each new account making the next one easier for someone to give. By midnight, the story had been picked up in Denver, Chicago, Washington, and New York. By 1 in the morning, an environmental advocacy organization had issued a statement calling for an immediate federal investigation. At 2:17 a.m., his phone rang again. Same number. He let it ring 4 times, then answered. Mr. Harmon. Same voice, same controlled cadence. But underneath it now, something different. A hairline fracture in the surface. The sound of a controlled person encountering the first real evidence that control might have limits. I told you not to call this number, Eli said. I want to be direct with you, Wren said. The initial offer was a courtesy. I'm prepared to be significantly more generous. $25 million, a new identity, full documentation, a starting account in a jurisdiction of your choosing. You could go anywhere in the world, build a life that has nothing to do with Montana or any of this. There it was, the thing under the composure. $25 million was not the offer of a man who believed he could still win. It was the offer of a man who had started calculating what losing was going to cost him and had decided that $25 million was cheaper, which meant he was already losing, which meant the evidence was working. Eli thought about his mother, 29 years old, standing in that apartment, choosing to carry something dangerous because it was the right thing to do, and she was the person who had it, and she couldn't pretend that wasn't true. My mother was 29 years old, Eli said. She chose the truth. So did my father, so did my grandfather for 13 years. He paused. 25 million doesn't change what they chose, and it doesn't change what I'm going to choose. Don't call this number again. He ended the call, set the phone down. The thing in his chest that had been building since the first night, since the photograph, since the letter, since the brown leather journal, and I sit here and I talk to the air, that thing was fully weight-bearing now. Structural. Not the hardness of someone who had nothing left to lose. The hardness of someone who knew exactly what they were standing for and had decided it was worth standing. He went to the hydroponics module and spent an hour checking the systems. Not because they needed checking, because the work of tending living things was the most honest thing he knew how to do when everything else felt too large to hold. His hands moved through the rows, adjusting a tomato stake that had come loose from its guide, checking the nutrient solution levels, noting that the lettuce in the third tier was ready to harvest. He'd never grown anything before, never had the continuity that growing required, the confidence that you would be in the same place long enough to see something through from planting to harvest. That confidence had not been available to him for the first 18 years of his life. It was available now. What followed was not a single dramatic event. It was a sequence of institutional processes working at the pace that institutions actually work, which is slower than any story makes it sound, and for that reason, more real. The EPA issued a public statement 8 days after the initial reporting, confirming the opening of an emergency environmental investigation into multiple land parcels in Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. The statement named Apex Land Group as a company of interest. The remediation bid scheme came out 14 days later in a more detailed statement, drafted by someone who'd read the financial model carefully and understood what they were looking at. The phrase closed-loop liability system appeared in official federal language for the first time. His mother's exact words. He sat with that for a while. Former Apex employees started speaking publicly in the second week. 3 of them. None coordinated with each other. A site acquisition manager who called the shell company structure standard procedure that nobody questioned. A logistics coordinator who described transporting materials he'd been told were inert fill. An environmental compliance officer who had raised internal concerns in 2011 and been dismissed 3 weeks later with a non-disclosure agreement she now said she no longer felt bound by. Other landowners followed. Two families in Colorado, a rancher in Wyoming who had noticed discoloration in a creek running through land adjacent to a former Apex site, who had been told by state regulators that testing showed nothing of concern, who had not believed it and had been correct not to believe it. Each account created room for the next. Each voice made the next voice easier. Eli tracked all of it from below ground. Every morning before he climbed the stairs to check the sky and breathe the Montana air and look at 40 acres of land that was beginning slowly to be something other than a secret. Several months after the packages went out, Petra called on a Tuesday morning. The grand jury returned an indictment. Her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it, held carefully. The way you hold something you've been waiting for and are still afraid of disturbing. 37 counts federal, environmental crimes, conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction. He said nothing. The obstruction counts include documentation of interference with my mother's investigation in 2008. She stopped, took a breath. Vivian Calloway is named in the indictment as the first person to identify the scheme. The conduct against her is formally part of the obstruction record. Eli was at the desk, the photograph of his mother in front of him, the sideways Tuesday light, the baby. How does that feel? He asked. He didn't usually ask questions like that. He asked it now because he wanted to know. Petra was quiet for a long moment. Like something that was wrong for a very long time, she said. Just got written down correctly. A pause. She was right, she said. The whole time, she was right. And now it's in the federal record. She was right, Eli said. Your father was right, too. The indictment references the original financial documentation he compiled. His name is there, Garrett Harmon, listed as the originating source. Eli looked at the photograph. His mother, the sideways light. If I only ever get to do one thing right in my entire life, this is it. She'd done more than one thing right. He wanted to tell her that. He didn't have a way to tell her that. So he sat with it the way he'd learned to sit with things that had no practical outlet, quietly, letting it be true even if it couldn't be spoken. Your grandfather should have been here to see this, Petra said. He is, Eli said. A pause. Yeah, she said. I think he is. Aldous Wren was arrested on a Wednesday morning. At O'Hare Airport in Chicago, Gate C-22. He had a ticket to Zurich. He had 2 passports in his jacket. Neither in his name. Eli heard about it from Olin, who showed up at the base of the rise with a thermos of coffee. The specific expression on his face was one Eli had never seen there, before a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, finally feeling it lift. Airport in Chicago, Olin said. Yesterday evening. I heard. Radio said 2 passports, neither in his name. Eli accepted the thermos, poured a cup. The morning light was doing something across the sage the way Montana morning light does in early spring, reaching further than it had in months practicing warmth. They stood there for a while, not talking, looking at the land, the sky above it all enormous and pale and beginning to change. Then Olin extended his hand, not the loose handshake of social formality, a real one, offered once, held for a moment, released, the kind that meant exactly one specific thing. Eli shook it. Olin picked up his keys, got back in the truck, drove down the access road. And Eli stood on the rise for a moment after the truck disappeared, holding the thermos, looking out at 40 acres that had kept its secret long enough. Then he went back inside, back to work. There was still a cabinet he hadn't opened. The one labeled personal in the far right corner of the vault floor to ceiling. He'd been circling it for weeks, not avoiding it exactly, more like saving it. The way you save the last piece of something that matters because once it's finished, and the space it occupied doesn't fill back in. He'd understood from the beginning that everything in the operational files belonged to the case, to Fletcher's mission, to the evidence. but the cabinet labeled personal was just his. He opened it. Inside letters, unsent, written to Eli over 13 years and never mailed because mailing them would have been too dangerous. 7 envelopes labeled with ages. Age 7, age 9, age 12, age 14, age 15, age 16, age 17, each one sealed. He sat down on the floor of the vault, back against the opposite cabinet, the envelopes in his lap. He opened them in order, not quickly, one at a time, reading each one fully before moving to the next. Age 7. I heard you got a good report at school. Your investigator mentioned it. She said your teacher called you thorough. I don't know if you know this about yourself yet, but thorough is a thing worth being. Most people aren't. Most people want to be finished rather than right. You are already different from most people. Age 9. You went to a science museum for a field trip and apparently asked the guide 14 questions about the water cycle exhibit. 14. I counted. Your investigator found this amusing. I found this expected. And then I sat here for a long time thinking about 14 questions about the water cycle from a 9-year-old who doesn't know yet that water is exactly what this is all about. Age 12. You taught yourself to read a blueprint from a library book. I don't know why you decided to do that. I suspect you won't be able to explain it either. Some things just make sense to certain people. Blueprints made sense to me too. I wonder sometimes if that kind of thing is passed down or if it just finds its way to the people who need it. Age 14. I know this year has been hard. I don't know the details. I know it's been hard because the investigator's report was shorter than usual. And people write shorter reports when they can't find words for the things they're seeing. I want you to know that I know. And I'm here even if you don't know I'm here. I am always here. Age 15. You got a job at a hardware store 3 mornings a week before school. I'm not surprised. You've always known that you have to build things yourself if you want them to hold. You figured that out before you were old enough to put words to it. Age 16. There is a girl named Rosa whose family you've been helping. Her parents don't speak much English, and you've been going with them to appointments as a translator, which is interesting because you don't speak Spanish. But you looked it up. Of course you did. You looked it up and then you went, that is exactly the kind of person you are. I wish I could tell you that in person. Age 17. 1 more year. I think about that. 1 more year and you'll be old enough. And I'll finally be able to show you everything. I've been saying that for 11 years. 1 more year. And each year the thing I have built has gotten a little more complete. And each year you've gotten a little more ready for it, even though you don't know you're getting ready. You've been getting ready your whole life. So have I. I want you to know that whatever happens, I was never not here. Not for a single day. He sat on the floor of the vault with all 7 envelopes in his hands. 7 letters. 13 years distilled into the ordinary and specific details of a boy's life. A man paying attention to the small things because the small things were all he had access to, and he had understood with the intelligence of someone who knew how to reduce things to what actually mattered, that they were not actually small. A friend named Darren. 14 questions about the water cycle. A girl named Rosa whose family needed someone to show up. All of it written down. Kept in a cabinet in a room underground in Montana. Waiting. He stacked the letters carefully, put them back in their envelopes, set them on the table, and said out loud to the air, I came, because it seemed like the thing to say. Because somewhere in the logic of this room and this man, in 13 years of a kind of love that had no other channel available to it, it seemed like the thing Fletcher would have wanted to hear. Eli stayed in the vault for a while after that, not reading anything, not working, just sitting with the weight of what this room contained and letting it mean what it meant. Then he went upstairs and outside, into the Montana afternoon. The season had been turning while he was underground. It was spring now, properly the sage putting out new growth. A pair of meadowlarks in the fence line at the eastern edge of the property, singing at dawn in a way that was impossible to sleep through and impossible to mine. The light had changed. It reached further, had more intention to it. He stood on the rise above the hut and looked out at the land. 40 acres. A house underground built for him by a man who had no other way to be present. A hydroponics module growing things in the warm light of a perpetual afternoon. A brown leather journal. 7 sealed letters. A recording that still played in his memory sometimes when he was working in the pre-dawn quiet, low and deliberate and unhurried. The voice of a man who had decided what he wanted to say. A photograph of a woman on a Tuesday afternoon with a sideways light coming through the window, holding something she intended to keep. In the months that followed, he built the cabin. Not because he needed to. The habitation module was functional, better than functional. But Fletcher had designed it for one person living underground out of necessity. And Eli didn't intend to live underground forever. He intended to live on this land in the open with the sky above him. Fletcher's technical library had 3 volumes on timber frame construction and 2 on foundation work in high-altitude, frost-prone soil. He read them all. Olin helped with the foundation work. Cass helped with the framing. Neither of them knew much about timber construction specifically, but both of them knew how to read a plan and follow it carefully and ask questions when something didn't make sense, which turned out to be exactly the right set of skills. Petra came out on weekends when her caseload allowed. She didn't help with the physical work. She sat on a cooler in the afternoon light and read and drank coffee and sometimes looked up to watch them work and said nothing, which Eli found exactly the right thing. On a Saturday in late April, she looked up from her legal pad and said, "My father would have liked Fletcher." Eli was fitting a rafter. He didn't stop working. Yeah, he was the same kind of stubborn, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just keeps doing the work because the work needs doing. She looked at the frame going up. He never got to see any of this. He spent 9 years trying to clear his name and was still fighting it when he died. The indictment didn't come in time for him. "I'm sorry," Eli said. "The indictment names what was done to him," she said. "It's in there. The conduct against my parents, against my mother first, then my father. On the record. That's not nothing." She looked down at her pad. "That's not nothing at all." The afternoon light moved across the frame, across the sage, across 40 acres of ground that had held its secrets and was beginning slowly to simply be what it was. The water testing results went public in May, not the industrial contamination which had been public since the EPA statement, but the quantified health impact data, the specific compounds, the concentration levels, the projected exposure timeline for residents who had been drinking from the municipal supply, and the remediation timeline, which was long and expensive and necessary. The county health office set up testing sites, long lines, people bringing their children, people who had been drinking from those taps for years without knowing what was in the water, people who were frightened and angry and had questions that took time to answer properly. Eli went to one of the testing sites on a Tuesday. Not to be seen, he went the way you go to a place because you need to understand what something means in human terms, rather than just geological or legal terms. He stood at the edge of the parking lot and watched the line. Families, older couples, a woman with 3 kids managing all of them while trying to fill out the intake form on a clipboard. A man in work clothes who had driven 40 minutes from the next county and was checking his watch because he had to get back to a job that couldn't wait. He stood there for 20 minutes. Then he got back in the truck Olin had loaned him and drove back to the property, and went below and tended the plants. The land trust meeting happened the following week. Dr. Reeves attended in person driving down from Missoula. She was exactly what Petra had described, someone who cared about the methodology, who understood that 11 years of quarterly data was not a coincidence, but a commitment, who spent an hour going through Fletcher's sampling protocols with the reverence of a scientist encountering work that had been done correctly in conditions that should have made correct work impossible. "I've never seen anything like this from a single independent collector," she said. She was holding one of Fletcher's data notebooks, turning the pages carefully. The consistency over 11 years, the documentation. He understood exactly what he was building. Eli looked at the notebook in her hands, at the familiar, precise handwriting in its rows. Yes, he said. He did. And then it was late May, and the cabin was almost finished, and the meadowlarks were still in the fence line, and the remediation process had formally begun. Funding appropriated federal teams scheduled the first assessment crews arriving the following month to start the long, careful work of addressing what had been buried here and in 11 other places across 6 states. The criminal case was moving through the federal system at the pace federal cases move, which was slow, which was fine, because the evidence was comprehensive. And evidence doesn't have a deadline the way deadlines do. Eli stood on the rise above the cabin frame on a morning in late May, coffee in hand, the air sharp and clean. He looked out at the land, at the sage running to the fence line, at the enormous sky doing what Montana sky does in late spring, filling itself with light as if it's been waiting all winter for the chance. He thought about what his mother had written. You came from that Tuesday afternoon. Whatever is happening now, wherever you are, somewhere in your very beginning, there was a moment that was entirely simple. You were held, you were warm, and someone loved you so much it felt like it was going to come apart at the seams. He stood on the rise and drank his coffee and let the morning light do what morning light does when you give it enough sky and enough time, which has become something you can feel on your face. Something real, something that doesn't require explanation because it's just there, just light, just the simple and sufficient fact of a new day arriving. He went back inside, through the hut, down the stairs, through the habitation module with its warm light, in its shelves of books, in its kitchen. He picked up the photograph from the desk, held it for a moment, set it back down, carefully, in its place. Then he went to the hydroponics module. The basil needed a third pass. He'd thinned it twice already and it kept growing, kept reaching, the way it does when the conditions are right and no one interferes with what it's trying to do. He worked through this section carefully, removing what was overgrown, making room. The warm, humid air of the module, full of the smell of it, sharp and alive and entirely itself. His hands moving through the fragrant green growth, the way you move through something you've learned to tend, which is without hurry and without the need to be anywhere else. He'd never grown anything before coming here, never had the continuity that growing required, the confidence that you would be in the same place long enough to see something through from beginning to whatever came next. That confidence had not been available to him for the first 18 years of his life. It was available now. Outside, above 2 feet of Montana soil, in a concrete slab in a Quonset hut that looked like nothing from the road, 40 acres of ground went about its morning. The meadowlarks in the fence line, the sage in its long, slow pulse with the wind, the hawk lifting off the eastern ridge on a thermal beginning its daily circuits, patient and exact, doing the work it was built to do. And underneath it all, below the ordinary-looking land in the ordinary-looking sky, a room, warm, lit, running all its systems, full of the things one person had spent 13 years making ready for another person, full of the careful and specific evidence of a love that had no language but this, no channel but presence. And when presence was impossible, it became preparation instead. It became geothermal lines and water filtration systems and a blue binder that said, here is what exists, and here is how it works, and here is what to do when something needs attention. It became 7 envelopes labeled with ages. It became a voice recording and a brown leather journal and a photograph of a woman on a Tuesday afternoon holding something she intended to keep. It became 40 acres of ground and everything beneath it waiting for the right person, held in trust by someone who understood that some things are worth building even when you can't be there to see them used. Eli Harmon, who had spent 18 years learning to need nothing from the world, so the world couldn't take it, stood in the room his grandfather built for him, intended the things growing there, and stayed. Not because he had no choice, not because the road behind him had closed, because for the first time in 18 years, someone had built him something worth staying for, And he was finally someone who knew how to recognize it. And that was enough. That was it turned out more than enough.